As the Joe Biden presidency continues to collapse in on itself like a dying star, as the scandals and failures and missteps and blunders keep multiplying like a 50-car pileup on a wet freeway on a foggy morning when it's also National Drunk Driving Day, the people who run the administration, whoever the hell they are, and their dutiful water boys and water girls in the fake news media are becoming increasingly desperate to deflect public attention away from their own cataclysmic ineptitude and onto absolutely anything else. Which brings me neatly along to this Justice for J6 thing that took place in the nation's capital over the weekend. And if you missed it, don't feel bad because everybody else missed it too. But the White House and the congressional Democrats and the fake news performance artists, they were extremely desirous that this thing turn into a violent confrontation akin to the January 6th insurrection. And do you like how that's become just the common shorthand for that silly riot that was over and done with in under 90 minutes? In fact, if you don't refer to it as the January 6th insurrection because, I don't know, you care about correct word usage or something crazy like that, they will gasp out loud and then clutch their pearls tightly with both hands and proclaim that you too, sir, must be a filthy insurrectionist. It's sort of the same twisted logic whereby even if you've had the vaccine, even if your whole family's had the vaccine, even if you've never said an unkind word about the vaccine, they will declare you an anti-vaxxer if you don't support nationwide brute force vaccine mandates. But that's just where we are now, in the United States of Authoritarica. But who knows? Maybe I'm painting with too broad of a brush here. Maybe some of the people at the Capitol on 6th January really did think they were engaged in an insurrection, that they and their unarmed rabble were going to successfully overthrow the U.S. government and install Chewbacca Man as the new emperor for life. I pledge allegiance to Emperor Chewbacca Man and to the fuzzy horn helmet for which he stands. I don't know. And the FBI still hasn't given us a specific answer about how many of the people in that crowd that day were on their own payroll, though they have admitted for the record that there were such people, in fact, present, or if any of the main agitators and instigators of the violence were among their personnel. But we do know, and I've been consistent on this since the video I made on the following day, on 7 January, that there was something about that day's events that just felt somehow suspiciously stage-managed and not entirely organic, like the whole thing was being engineered to create just the kind of video footage that we wound up getting. And who knows, maybe one day, probably some years down the road when all the facts are known, we'll find out it was an FBI false flag operation that was conceived and executed in order to justify a fake impeachment of Donald Trump after he had left office. And let's face it, it wouldn't even be the sleaziest thing the FBI ever did in attempting to discredit the 45th president. But if it wasn't clear before, it's becoming clearer with each passing day and week that all of the organs of our national government now serve one purpose only, and that is advancing the political fortunes of the Democrat Party. We know there are two separate and wildly different sets of rules that govern political violence. And which one that you're subject to depends entirely on which party you vote for. If you're a Joe Biden voter, and let's say you welded the doors shut on the federal courthouse in Portland and then tried to burn the building down with people inside it, you probably didn't get arrested for that. And if you did, the local DA turned you loose the next morning and never filed any charges. The FBI, they never noticed and didn't care that you tried to murder several hundred federal employees by burning them to death, which seems like it would be grounds for being federally charged, but nope. Not if you have the correct political views. You just go along your way, have a nice evening. But if you're a Trump supporter, and guilty of no crime more severe than trespassing on the Capitol grounds, or vandalizing a window frame, or farting on Nancy Pelosi's desk, well, chances are you've been held in solitary confinement for over 8 months now, and are facing a whole raft of federal charges that could see you incarcerated for the rest of your natural-born life. Which is what the Justice for J6 rally, ostensibly, was about. And it seems like the only people at this thing who weren't LARPing and cosplaying were the family members of the people who've been detained in solitary confinement since January, and you can't blame them for trying to use the only platform they have available to them, because it's not like the fake news media want to talk to them or tell their story, because your family members are filthy, disgusting insurrectionists, and they support Trump. But that was the only real thing about this weird joke of an event. They put up a whole bunch of fencing and barricades. They had lots of riot cops in full body armor on CNN and MSNBC. They tried for an entire week to publicize the thing and get people to show up. But on the day, in the event, the cops and the media outnumbered the attendees probably 3-1. Oh, and the attendees were all FBI agents anyway. Allegedly. I guess I have to say allegedly, even though, come on, do we all look like we were fucking born yesterday? Have you seen the crowd shots that have been circulating of this thing? You've got like a group of 5 or 6 guys pretending to wave a Gadsden flag, and they've all got perfect, fresh, high and tight regulation haircuts. They're wearing these ridiculous above-the-knee jeans shorts that they've got rolled up to the mid-thigh. And what the hell is that all about? Anyway, I am old enough to remember when jean shorts were cool. I've worn jean shorts more days of my life probably than most people have. And I'm here to tell you, no real person ever wore jean shorts that looked that fucking ridiculous. If you guys had all shown up wearing matching t-shirts that said, "No, I swear to God, I'm not an FBI agent," I think it actually would have been more subtle. Now, is this how people in Washington think conservatives dress? Out there in flyover country? I wonder how much research went into formulating the wardrobe for this sophisticated deep cover operation. I wonder how many millions of your tax dollars they spent trying to blend in with the MAGA crowd. But more importantly, and all well-deserved ridicule aside, I wonder what these guys' intentions were if an actual crowd had shown up for this thing. It seems obvious that there was a strong desire for some sort of violence to take place. So were these jokers on hand to foment and encourage it? So the fake news media could have another January 6th to talk about instead of Joe Biden's 5-alarm dumpster fire of a presidency? But here's the thing, guys. If you're setting up a honeypot trap, you need to be a hell of a lot more convincing than this. This thing was such a cartoonishly obvious honeypot, I half expected Chris Hansen to emerge from behind the bushes and say, "Sir, will you put your pants back on and have a seat over there, please?" No, Jim Eagle, you can leave your pants off. I know you prefer to work that way. Just like your hero, Jeffrey Toobin. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where masturbating in front of your co-workers during meetings isn't required, but it is strongly encouraged. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And we need to talk tonight about civil rights. If you're a law-abiding U.S. citizen right now, in the year 2021, you have fewer rights, fewer liberties, and less freedom than Americans have ever had during peacetime at any moment in the history of our republic. These past 18 months, we've witnessed a wholesale assault on our civil rights that simply is unprecedented, except during time of war, and sometimes not even then. And what's been the reason for it all? A Chinese flu virus, which was engineered with your money, by the way, so I know that makes you feel better. Now, your right to freely express your views in the public square has been severely degraded. If you're of a religious persuasion, you've been prohibited from going to church and freely practicing your faith. You have been required to cover your face in public. Depending on where you live and what your vocation is, you may have been required to submit your private medical records for inspection as a condition of keeping your job. And now, if the President of the United States has his way, you will be compelled to take an experimental drug, whether or not you want it or need it, in order to remain in the workforce. And when you lay it all out like that, it sounds like Nazi Germany type stuff, because that is exactly what it is. But we've allowed ourselves to become a nation of boiled frogs. They've been careful to only strip you of your civil rights slowly and gradually, and amazingly, maddeningly, there are still those among us who persist in thinking there is a version of this thing where we can obey our way out of it and magically get our old lives back. But I am here to tell you, there is not. If they had told you the truth back in March of last year, when it was 15 days to slow the spread, if Grand Ayatollah Anthony Fauci and the fake news performance artists had told you right up front that this crap would still be going on in the fall of 2021, if they'd told you that you would still have to wear the stupid obedience muzzle even after getting the vaccine, would you have happily acquiesced to shutting down the entire society? Of course you wouldn't have. Unless you're a crazy person. No sane person would have agreed to that. So, they lied. And they kept lying. And they kept moving the goalposts just another couple yards every week, and they're still doing it. And do you honestly think they have any intention whatsoever of giving back any of the power that we, through our apathy and our acquiescence, have allowed them to grab? Of course they don't. Because power is their religion. Grabbing more power is the only thing they know how to do, because that is what authoritarianism is. And when you're an authoritarian, you don't ever give back power once you have successfully grabbed it. This has not ever been about public health or defeating the virus. If the virus magically disappeared tomorrow, do you think they would just roll back all this control and all this power they've managed to gain for themselves? Hell no, they wouldn't. This virus has turned into their golden ticket, whereby they can realize all of their dreams for a bright authoritarian future, and we have allowed them to do it all too easily. Now, yesterday, I got into it with some guy in a comment thread. In my original post, I said something like, if you've had the vaccine and you're still walking around with a stupid obedience muzzle on your face, stop pretending you're following the science, because you're being a ridiculous paranoid hypochondriac who's just demonstrating a preference for living in a state of irrational fear. And this guy replies and says, but I have to wear it for work. Oh, really? You have to? What, your current job is the only job in the world? You don't have to do anything, son. You are choosing to wear that obedience muzzle. And then he says, well, I've worked really hard to get to where I am. I'm not going to blow my career just over a silly mask. And yeah, sure, of course, obviously that is entirely up to you. But don't tell me you have to do something when you are damn well choosing to do it. You know this is wrong. You know it's unscientific nonsense. You know it's part of the wholesale degradation of your rights and liberties. But at least have the courage and the honesty to call it what it is. You are choosing to do something you know is wrong because you don't want to face the consequences of doing what you know is right. And it is so goddamn frustrating to me when people express attitudes like that. Because if we keep going down that road, the road of, yeah, I would like to stand up for what's right, I just don't want to risk losing anything. I don't want to put any skin in the game. Then not only are we going to be the generation that squanders the gift of American liberty and self-government that a dozen generations of our forebears handed down to us, but we are all going to die in fucking prison camps. And that's no hyperbole. It's no overstatement. It's the thing that is going to happen if we don't figure out a way to locate our collective testicles and summon the moral courage that this moment in history demands of us. The men who were the founders of our republic, they put every single thing they had on the line, including their lives, in service of a goal that required winning a war in which they had no reasonable chance of prevailing. They put all their skin in the game on 2 July 1776. They made traitors of themselves when 24 of them, the representatives of 12 of the 13 colonies in the Second Continental Congress, voted in favor of the resolution by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, which stated that, quote, these colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, absolved of any and all allegiance to the British Crown. The Declaration of Independence, that wasn't the treasonous document. The Declaration was just the political manifesto that stated the justification for independence. It was the Lee Resolution that severed the allegiance of the colonies to the Crown. That was the document that impelled Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania to remark that, gentlemen, we must all hang together, or surely we shall hang separately. But it was actually worse than that, because in 1776, the maximum penalty for traitors to the British crown was still to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. For those who need a refresher, that means they hang you by the neck until you're not quite dead. Then they cut you down, disembowel you while you're still alive, burn your entrails before your eyes, then they mercifully chop off your head, cut up what's left of you into 4 equal portions, and send each one to a different town to be displayed publicly as a deterrent to any potential future traitors. If there had been no declaration of independence, that was the fate that still would have awaited the members of the Continental Congress for having voted in favor of the Lee Resolution. When we read about the American Revolution today, it is with the retrospective knowledge that our side wound up winning. But that knowledge makes us all too dismissive of just how much danger these men were putting themselves in if the enterprise wound up going south. On the day of the Lee Resolution, on 2 July 1776, if there had been Vegas odds makers in those days, what sort of a line do you think they would have put on our chances of defeating the most powerful army and the most powerful navy in the history of the world? 200 to 1? 500 to 1? 1,000 to 1? And any one of those might have been too charitable. All things considered, declaring our independence was a fool's errand that should have ended with the heads of Washington and Jefferson and Adams and Franklin mounted on spikes on London Bridge. But these were men of intellectual fortitude, and they were men of moral courage. They decided they would rather stand up for what is right and face an agonizing, grisly traitor's death than to keep everything they had, not take a risk, and acquiesce to what they knew was wrong. Are we still able to summon that fortitude and that courage today? I would like to be able to say we are. But when I hear my countrymen saying things like, "No, I can't, I'm too afraid of losing my job," I can't say it. I fear we are on the verge of acquiescing ourselves into oblivion and pissing away the awesome, mighty gift that was handed down to us by those men who were far wiser and far greater than any of those among our number today. For my own part, if it winds up being the judgment of history that I am on this earth, when the American experiment ends in failure, if mine has to be the generation on whose watch the gift of liberal democratic self-government on this continent is squandered for all time, then when I die in that prison camp, if my captors allow me to have a mirror, I don't want to look into it and see a man who declined to stand up for what he knew was right because he was scared of losing some job. We are in a struggle not only for our own civil rights as individuals, but for the life of our nation as a whole. It is long since past time that we started being cognizant of that fact and damn well acting like it. The generation that initiated the experiment of democracy and the generations since, all of our fathers and mothers who gave of themselves, who sometimes paid with their very lives to continue that experiment, to pass it down to their progeny, to make ours a more perfect union, to ensure that it shall not perish from the earth, what would they expect of us in this moment? I think we all know the answer, whether we want to admit it or not. Are we going to pass the gift of American liberty down to the generations that are not yet born? Or are we going to hand them a burned-out hellscape of authoritarianism and oppression and bondage and despair? That is the choice we have to make for ourselves right now. Dr. Martin Luther King knew he was going to be assassinated. Mahatma Gandhi knew he was going to be assassinated. Was the moral courage of either man diminished by that knowledge? Or did they each continue to stand for what they knew was right, in spite of the cost, in spite of the knowledge that they would pay the ultimate price for doing so? Today we live in a world of pitiful cowards who back down because they don't want to get downvoted on social media. And how will that make future generations view our generation? King and Gandhi showed us the roadmap for what is required of us if we decide to be principled and courageous. Do not comply with things you know are wrong. Do not acquiesce to evil and tyranny. Resist without violence. Never cede the moral high ground. Make them arrest you. Make them imprison you. Make them turn the dogs and the fire hoses on you. Resist in such large numbers that you overwhelm the ability of the oppressor to oppress you, and then you have taken the oppressor's power away from him. That is what moral courage looks like, and it remains to be seen whether this generation of Americans chooses to summon it. Thanks for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Wednesday. Get off my lawn.